All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Unhooked Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lipkowitz, joined today by my brother, Ali Dewji. Ali, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Yeah. So I've been excited to talk with Ali on the show for a while because we met in Bali and realized that we had a lot of similarities in terms of all things related to recovery and addiction and personal development. Also, we both love cookies and have kind of a sweet tooth around that. And so I wanted to bring Ali on just to talk about his own story of recovery. So for the listeners out there who haven't gotten in touch with you yet, could you just give people a sense of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, I'm helping people through recovery with addictions to alcohol and other substances, but largely alcohol and cocaine. With my background being from London, South London, especially, like that's where those issues are really, really rife among men. I know that they're rife in a lot of other parts of the world as well, but yeah, that's my background and the culture that I kind of grew up around, kind of heavy alcohol and cocaine use. So I'm helping guide men and women through those addictions into kind of a life of sobriety. But yeah, also at the moment I'm in the UK, but as you say, we met in Bali, and I live in Bali. That's kind of my permanent residence at the moment. And yeah, and also have in the last, I'd say 6 months to a year, gone down the path of ultra endurance training as well. So I've been out there doing some pretty wacky stuff.
Yeah, and that's basically for as long as I've known you, you've been in the endurance game. So I just always see you as kind of a endurance sobriety coach. I'm curious just to know, where did your story begin? Like when you look at your history with substance and substance use and substance abuse, where does it begin for you?
I suppose probably at its earliest was in teen years, and it just being something that was heavily associated with socializing for me and social anxiety. When I was a teenager, I was quite overweight. And because of that, I really developed a lot of people pleasing tendencies just to try and fit in. I had a lot of, just a lot of stuff around fitting in. Um, A, because of my weight, and B, because I'm mixed race. So my father is Indian and my mother's white. I grew up in South London, which is a very multicultural place. But I think where it is so multicultural, there are pockets of communities, whether that's like, an Indian community, a Chinese community, a West Indian community. And being mixed race, I felt like I never really slotted into any of them. I could be like the social chameleon, and I was the guy that everybody got on with because I was people pleaser and I was mirroring everyone's personalities back to them. But I was able to hang out with lots of different groups, but I always had this underlying feeling that I didn't 100% belong to any of those communities, which gave me a real sense of feeling quite lost and uh, just had a lack of a sense of belonging within my own body. So then I met cannabis and I met alcohol, and they made me feel at home with who I was. And they kind of sparked this alter ego in me that had an abundance of confidence and likability. Uh, and that just became, I think it was more that character that I became addicted to than necessarily the substance itself. I just enjoyed being him.
Mhm.
Um, and then where that got into a slippery slope was then when using those substances and becoming that character became more of something I was doing for regulating my nervous system or for like self emotional support, really. Like if anything was like out of alignment with my reality, I would go there. I would become him. And then as the use started to get more frequent and heavier, um, the substances just, they weren't turning me into him anymore. I was just me, but high. I was me, but like drunk and slurring my words. I wasn't a charismatic, outgoing, fun loving version of Ali. I was just like a real sloppy, drunk version of Ali. and I'd lost that character. I'd lost myself. Um, and it just became daily for me. And it then moved from becoming that character to just numbing what my existence was. So it became, I wouldn't even say it was an escape because I was always fully aware of who I was, but it was just a numbing
Mm.
in the end. And towards that end period, it was genuinely waking up and finding a source of alcohol within kind of 30, 40 minutes of being awake.
Wow. So it got to a pretty dark place where it was
Yeah, it got pretty dark.
waking up and drinking in the morning.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to the point where I would usually go to bed making sure that there was like a glass of wine left in the bottle, or I would make sure I still had one beer in the fridge. And that would actually help me sleep better, knowing that the one for the morning was there, that I wouldn't have to like wake up in a panic or a cold sweat or have to go and find something. Like I had one there could get me to the shops or could get me to, in the UK, we have pubs that open at 8 a.m. in the morning. Um, so it would get me to there. Like, so if I'd woken up at 7 and the pub wasn't open for an hour, like I still had one that I could get me through to that time.
Yeah. And you're bringing up another point, which is kind of how it's normalized, particularly in some Western societies. With the UK in general, it seems like drinking is such a normalized, like going to the pub at 8 a.m. is actually possible. Did that play a role
It's
in kind of the addiction?
I can definitely remember thinking at the time when I was in pub in the morning, it's a real tussle because there was a part of me that knew that that was like real bad behavior. It knew that that wasn't the sort of thing that the masses did. It knew that this was definitely the behavior of an alcoholic. And then there was another part of me that was like, yeah, but there's loads of other people here too.
Right.
So I kind of, it definitely normalized it from that point of view. So like I did do a lot of my drinking at home alone, but then I did also do a lot of my drinking alone in pubs, but it was alone where there were other people that were alone. So I definitely think that that made me feel, yeah, less isolated in a way. It was kind of like we're all alcoholics and we're all struggling, but at least we're all here in this room doing it
Yeah.
together. Like we didn't really feel the need to talk to each other, but there was definitely a comfort in knowing that there were these other, largely men, like sat in this pub of all ages, varying from like early 20s to like retired guys that just pick up their pension and sit in a pub all day. Um, but there was definitely some sort of comfort in that.
Mhm. I'm wondering, I imagine that there was like a turning point, like a rock bottom or something like that. But I'm actually curious, before any kind of major turning point, were there some signs that you were starting to notice? Were there cracks in the wall that were starting to show before you actually had some major turning point?
Yeah, yeah. I think for probably about 2 years before I actually gave up, I knew how destructive what I was doing was being. Like there was awareness of it. Like I could see that it was affecting the relationship that I was in. I run a business at the time. I run a business with my sister. I could see how it was impacting the business. I could see how it was impacting my relationship with my family, with my sister. Uh, it had got to a point where for a while, I was kind of hiding it, and I was still hiding it in that time, but it was kind of like I'm hiding it, but kind of out of respect. Like I think I know that they know. Like the people around me, definitely the people that were closest to me. Um, so it's almost like I kept up the charade of hiding it, but I knew I wasn't really hiding it that well. And I kind of knew that everybody knew. Um, everybody in the very inner circle. And it's interesting, like, because I'm back in the UK and the computer that I'm on is this computer's here. And when I fired it up, it loads up all of like, some old files and old notes and the notes that I pulled up to look at a recent one. And it had loads of old notes on it. And I have like to-do list notes from that time where I'm writing notes to myself saying stuff like, please just try and not drink today. or like on the to-do list from like a year before I actually got sober. Like the top thing on the to-do list was like, don't drink.
Wow.
So like I was battling against it and I knew I didn't want to do it, but every day I would just wake up and be like, maybe tomorrow. Just, I can't deal with it today. Like today I need that drink, maybe tomorrow. And then in mid-afternoon when I was kind of quite drunk or like, probably in quite a good headspace where I'd got past that dread. And then I was like, right, I'm feeling all right now, mate. It will be tomorrow. I just need to stop drinking now, get to sleep, and I'll wake up and feel. I always just kept having this strong belief that if I could get to 2 days, I thought I would be fine. But if I could get to 48 hours without using, I thought I just had this and created this belief in my head that that was the magic number. I was like, if I can do 2 whole days without using, then I think I can do it for the rest of my life. And it was at that point, I tried so many times and I just couldn't get past 12 hours. I just couldn't get past 12 hours. I couldn't get past 24 hours. And I think that was because I only had myself holding myself accountable at that time. And I wasn't strong enough to enforce that boundary.
To ask for help or seek support, be in community.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, none of that.
What was the turning point?
So the turning point was actually the end of that relationship that I was in. So talking about leading up to that kind of rock bottom, if you will, I think my ex had given me ultimatums a couple of times. And because after the first one, like she didn't leave, then I was kind of like, oh, I'm just calling her bluff. Like, again, like, testing those boundaries, as a lot of addicts do. And then the third, I thought she was bluffing again. And then she was like, no, I'm serious. Like it's over. I can't do this anymore. And
Was that about the drinking? That was the main thing that she was
yeah,
leaving up?
it was the main thing. It was the main thing. I know it was everything that was with that. I think it's very, like, I have a lot of compassion for her for being strong enough to leave that relationship because we were together 12 years. We were engaged. Like we had this kind of life planned out. And I look back at that time through the lens of her, and she was just watching the guy that she loved fall apart, crumble, become a shadow of him former self. Like, wasn't the athletic go-getter entrepreneur that she'd fallen in love with, who just like lost every ounce of his soul to this. And I think she genuinely believed and still does that, like, and she probably was right, that if she hadn't have left me and she'd have, not necessarily saying that she was enabling it, but if she'd have stayed with me, I probably wouldn't have made the changes that I have in my life. So I think she knew for me to get better, had to be without her, which must have been a horrible reality for her to face, to think the kindest thing that I can is leave him to do this on his own. Where was he at that time? I was like, she's leaving me at the time that I need her the most, but that wasn't true. In hindsight, she was the one that was thinking clearly. I wasn't. So it was that relationship coming to an end. And in a weird sense, like the day after she left me, I felt so relieved. I felt like there was so much of me that I was hiding, that I was shameful about, that I was carrying guilt around how I'd treated her, that even though I was really sad and in quite a depressed state, there was definitely, I don't know, spiritually or energetically, some element of demon had kind of lifted out of me that had made space for transformation. That I didn't feel like I had that space before. And I think that's often something that comes up around hitting rock bottom, whatever rock bottom looks like for everybody. I know looking back, like things could have got 100,000 times worse than they actually did. But it was at that point where I think I knew that the work and the effort and the everything that was going to be required to change was going to be horrible and going to be hard work. But staying the same was also going to be horrible and hard work. And it was at the first point there where I was like, actually doing this work is actually the easier option. It's easier to turn this around than it is to let this carry on going down. Cause it felt like a real fork in the road. It was like with this relationship over, like almost kind of like, who else is going to take you in this state that you're in? Like, you're not fit for anybody. You're not going to offer you're not really offering any value to society, to a relationship, to any human being. And you're at this crossroads where the kinds of people that I had in my life, even though they probably knew I was drinking a little bit too much or taking a bit too much drugs, at the end of a 12-year relationship where you were engaged to the girl, like, I've kind of almost had the whole past that I would have allowed me to go out and get as fucked up as I wanted for, the next couple of months. And people have been like, yeah, he's been through a lot. Ellie's just left it. Like, I would have been allowed that space to kind of do it. Maybe after a period, they would have kicked in and been like enough's enough, Ali, you need to sort yourself out. But I just felt like that was dangerous and I didn't want to go down that path. So it was like, yeah,
It was a real wake up call for you.
yeah, where I just felt it feels like now is kind of the only, feels like if it's going to happen for me, it's going to be now. Like how much else are you going to let fall apart or are you going to lose before you do what you know you need to do?
Yeah. What did you then, so once you had this turning point, what did you turn to find a way out of the hole?
I immediately, like, I still had this idea around 48 hours at that point. And at that point, I went back to my family house. So I went back and I told my mum and my sister, like, it was almost like this big deal for me. I was like, guys, I'm an alcoholic. And they were like, yeah, we know. We've known for ages. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And it was almost like, I just felt like almost like a cold turkey. I was like, I kind of just need you to not let me leave the house for 48 hours. Like, I think it was, so many things that we know through personal development, like how much of an impact belief has. And I think because for so long, I just held this belief, if I can get past 48 hours, I'll be fine. Whether or not there's any truth to that or any scientific, it was just the facts that I would say over 2 years, I'd told myself hundreds of times, if you can get to 48 hours, you'll be okay. So I was like, right, this is it. I just need to almost like lock myself in this house. However horrible it's going to be for 48 hours, like clear all the alcohol out, lock me in a room and just get me to 48 hours and 1 minute. And I genuinely had a belief everything would be fine from that point onwards. And it wasn't like magically fine, but I think because I had that, it was so linked to a belief I held that it definitely made it easier for me in that interim. And then it just became like a momentum. It was like, oh, cool. So if I can do 48, then maybe I can do 72. And then maybe I can get that to 100 hours. And just used real baby steps at that point, but did surround myself with accountability. I think within the first 2 weeks of deciding that I was going to stop, I'd made it a forever decision. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just going to go and see if I can get to a month. Like, I made it public, like on my Facebook profile at the time. I basically was like, if you see me out, don't buy me a drink, don't offer me a drink. Like, I had friends' weddings that I'd already committed to go to. So when I made sure everybody who was at the wedding knew, and I really owned the situation. I was like, it's not a health thing. Like, I'm an addict and I'm getting sober. Like, this isn't like, oh, I'm just trying to be good and not drinking. It's like, no, I have an actual problem. And I think this is something that I bring into my coaching a lot, which is that when it comes to the boundaries around any kind of lifestyle change or habit change, that people will respect your boundaries up until the point which you respect them yourself. And if you introduce your boundary as a hard line, and if you say, no, I'm an ex-addict, I don't drink anymore, don't offer me a drink, and you say it to somebody in that direct tone, someone will be like, all right, cool. Whereas if you'd be like, I'm just trying to be a bit healthier at the moment, trying to stay off the sauce, it's not good for the waistline, or I'm just trying to avoid the hangovers because I've got a lot. People be like, oh, don't be silly, come on,
you're
have
almost
one. But if you're
inviting
like,
them to test your
exactly,
boundaries.
yeah, you're making it harder because this is just how human beings work, right? So I think that was a massive part of how hard it was for me to be vulnerable in that moment, and how hard it was for me to admit this thing, alcohol, that's a part of everybody's life, and that loads of people seemed to me to have a handle on and be able to drink socially and enjoy and have the glass of wine here or have a few beers on the boys' night and then not really drink for a couple of weeks. I kind of had to admit, I was like, nah, kick my ass. It got me. Like, I'm not one of the people that can stand up to alcohol and win. Like, I lost. I'm taking the L. It kicked the shit out of me. It's just not something I have capacity or the strength to have in my life in moderation. And just putting my hand up to that and being like, that's where we're at. That's how this is going to go for me from here on out. It's going to have to be a life without it, because I've tried a life with it and it got real bad.
What does recovery mean to you?
I think recovery means taking back everything that I'd lost through addiction, and not in terms of like material things or relationships, but more on like a spiritual and soulful level. I feel like I lost a lot of myself to substances, and recovery is about regaining those aspects of myself that I lost. Whether that is, just finding joy in a little thing in quite a childlike manner, or, when people will see you that haven't seen you in a while and just be like, yeah, your eyes look a bit more sparkly, like those kind of little qualities. Like, it's not necessarily like, oh, you've lost weight, you look great. It's just like, no, your energy's changed. Like, you feel you're a different person to be around. You become a bit more sure of yourself, because for me, you're not hiding from the parts of your shadow that you really want to avoid, which is the hard part of recovery. As I'm sure you know as well, like that shadow work that we do, like stepping into that darkness and being like, okay, it's fine. I can hold this. I don't need to run away from this shadow by drinking it away or any other kind of vices that we might have to avoid the work that needs to be done. And then it's just a constant cycle of feedback. It's like, okay, the more that I step into it and do the work and come back, the easier life becomes on the day to day or like the month to months. Like, instead of just thinking, oh no, that's hard, I want to avoid that, or that's uncomfortable, I don't want to deal with that. It just becomes this pattern of like, okay, that's come up, let's investigate. Let's do the work we need to do to move through that. Or let's accept that that's just a part of us that we need to invite in and have a little love and compassion towards, as opposed to resisting, avoiding, putting our heads in the sand, or just numbing, which is kind of what the case was for me.
Yeah.
There are definitely occasions in recovery for me where I don't necessarily crave a drink. I just crave the safety blanket. Sometimes I just think, oh, it would be nice to just have the off switch or the ability to not have to deal with this. And then, that it's not the cravings that I get aren't like, I really want to run to a pub and down a pint. It's just like, oh, I just don't want to deal with this thing that's come up. Like, I really want to escape this plane.
How do you find the balance? Knowing that you can't face everything all the time and you do have to, I'm just curious for you, how do you know when to take a step back and say, I don't have the capacity or the resources to deal with this right now, versus,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, that comes through having some element of routine around practices that I engage with on a daily or weekly basis. And then those rippling out into my life. So obviously, where I'm practicing meditation, there is a lot of noticing what comes and not reacting. And then obviously happens when you're away from the mat or away from, your meditation practice. So there's an element of an awareness and noticing things that are coming in, but not reacting to everything as it comes up, whether that is in meditation or in real life. And then when I come back to my practice of journaling, or I might make a note. Like, if I'm out and about on the fly, like something's coming up, I might make a note. I'll be like, okay, like I'll journal on that later and I'll try and investigate that later. I don't need to stop what I'm doing right now and give that credit, because by the time I look at that later, I might be like, oh, I'm not that bothered about that anymore. That just kind of came up and um, so yeah, I tend to not let things derail me as they come up. But then I do find time in my day or in my week to try and pick those things apart, or whether I'm talking them through with my coach or my therapist as well. Um, they kind of go on that sort of pile. They are kind of compartmentalized, but I have people and tools to be able to kind of break them apart.
You've talked about the art of sobriety. What is that all about?
Mm. So the art of sobriety for me is when I was kind of looking back on my journey, and I had this kind of real compulsion to help other people through their journey. And I was really thinking about, what did I do that was not necessarily different, but just like, what did I do? Like, if I was to try and replicate how I've gone about sobriety, how would I do that? And in my last role, so at the company that I owned with my sister before, we had a non-fiction publishing company, and my role there was really to sit down with experts that knew something about anything and help them break down their way of doing things into kind of a repeatable model, would be easy for people to understand, or would have kind of pillars that people could kind of nestle ideas or exercises or anything like that within. So I was really trying to think about, like, what does it actually boil down to for me, and what's my approach been? And it was really that then I started to really look at, like, okay, well, it is part art and part science. So like, there is definitely, like, you know, a scientific side to, like, what's going on in the brain in terms of addiction. Um, and it's great to know that science, but then that doesn't necessarily help to over intellectualize something like recovery, because for the large part, it's how you're going about living your life and the choices and the decisions and the actions that you're making. So what's the artistic side of sobriety, which is kind of in the execution of, like, how you're becoming, I suppose, the artist of your life. You know, you get this opportunity in recovery to recreate who you are. Like, you could design it from the ground up. And I think there is an element of that that's freeing, and there's an element of that that's frightening when, it's like being at a restaurant, having a massive menu. There's so much choice, we both know as well, we could live anywhere in the world. How exciting. Then you're like, oh God, I actually do need to choose somewhere to live. So it is distilling all of those things into, I was like, okay, well, what is it? And art is an acronym. So it's acceptance, resilience, and trust. So these are like the three core skills or mindsets that could really help you move into long-term sobriety, because I was seeing a lot of stuff online that was like 30-day challenges or 90-day challenges. And I think now, as I've got a bit longer into sobriety, I think most people can blag their way through a 30-day challenge just on grit alone. Grit and determination can probably get you to a month sober, depending on how strong your addiction was. If you had, like, the right group, the right accountability, and you just had this sort of momentum about committing to yourself. But then there's a real difference to moving into long-term sobriety and the stuff that comes up. So the acceptance part of it is accepting that it is going to be a part of you, is with you forever. It's not going to be something that, you can cure yourself of and then dip back into. And just accepting as well, like, where you are on your journey, accepting everything around you just for being what it is, not labeling anything as good or bad, and just being as present as you can with the situation that you're in and the cards that you've been dealt, and not wishing that things were a different way, or like comparing myself to people that have never had an addiction, and just really taking ownership over that situation and letting go of any of those other energies of wishing things were a different way, because they're not. And then resilience, for me, this comes around building resilience in as many facets of your life as you can, away from substances. So it's not necessarily just building up the resilience to resist the craving. It's just becoming a more resilient person. And that's where some of the ultra endurance stuff came in for me. But also, like we've spoken about, like Vipassana and stuff like that. I think, resilience isn't always strength and speed and endurance. Sometimes it's, stillness is a hell of a lot more of a challenge for many of us. Like for me, especially, I would rather go out and run a marathon than sit still for 4 hours, like for sure. So finding those areas of resilience that can either make you strong enough to cope or strong enough to be still and hold.
Mm.
And I think those two things together of the strength, so it's that kind of the yin and the yang side of that duality of what resilience can be. Sometimes resilience is doing nothing and sometimes resilience is doing everything. Um, and then into the trust is just having much more of an honest and truthful relationship with who you are as a person. Because I think for lots of people who've been in addiction or where they have, maybe it's not as extreme as an addiction, but they have kind of a repeatable or a compulsive behavior with a habit, it's you lose trust with yourself because of the sheer amount of times that you told yourself you would change and you didn't, or the sheer amount of times that just internally you didn't tell anyone else, but you've committed to something so many times to yourself and you've let yourself down. You've like potentially for years, you've developed the habit of letting yourself down, which has meant that you just really don't trust who you are as a person. So it's rebuilding that relationship that you have with yourself, which takes time. And as well, there are relationships externally where trust needs to be rebuilt. In my case, like I'd lied to a lot of people, stolen money, like, just classic addict behavior. So there was bridges to build there, which does fall under that piece of trust, but it's generally rebuilding the relationship that you have with yourself so that you can actually trust yourself. If you say, I'm going to do that, like, that you're probably going to do it, which is a far cry from the version of me in the past where, every afternoon I was saying tomorrow and then tomorrow would come and it wouldn't happen. And the knock on effect of how that filters into every area of life, not just into addiction. It was, even saying that, oh, I'm going to post that letter and it would still be sat there like 4 days later. Little things like that would just ripple out where I just wouldn't do anything, I would say. So it's turning that side of you around. And if we can do those, just generally have more acceptance, build more resilience and rebuild trust with ourselves without having an overly intense focus on like, these are techniques to not to drink, or this is how to handle a sober night out with your friends. Like those are all the tactics, but the bigger picture, the stuff that's actually going to help you get years of sobriety is the way that you conduct yourself in the world so that you don't feel the need to have this state, that you have better tools to be able to deal with the stuff that life's throwing at you so that your go-to reaction isn't, oh, that's difficult, that's uncomfortable, I need to escape from substance.
Yeah. It sounds like you're talking about like the inner work of dealing with where the addiction is coming from in the first place, like dealing with the roots of the addiction, not just the tricks and tips for how to, white knuckle it for your first 30 days or how to deal with a sober night out, but how to actually untangle the mess that's going on inside of you so that you don't want to act out. You don't need to act out.
Exactly. And I do think both are needed.
Yeah.
Like even when I'm working with people, I will kind of say for the first few months, like, do whatever, like whatever gets you through. Like if you're smoking a little bit more, but you're not drinking, like that's cool. We can maybe unravel that later. Or like, like maybe we've had the sugar intake might have just rose a little bit more than normal, but it's all of that stuff. If it's whatever's getting you through that initial period. And if that is, tactics for non-alcoholic drinks or conversations to have at parties, like there is massive value in that because I think you do need a bit of momentum behind you. Like, whatever you can do,
You need
like
room to
even in my
breathe.
case, like I had that idea around 48 hours. It was kind of like, I just need to get there.
Yeah.
And then, okay, now I haven't drunk for a while. I can look at some of these other things. Especially, I think, with some of that inner work that if you're not at a certain level with your sobriety, you might not even be ready to go there. I think there is a danger with beginning sobriety with therapy because therapy brings up a lot that I think if you're like, day zero of sobriety, you have a lot on your plate in terms of like the action, is in front of you in the next few weeks to like try and go forward and go backwards at the same time. It's a lot for us to handle as
Right.
human beings. Like I'm trying to be really forward focused and focus on these healthy habits and not find myself in the pub, but I'm also, looking at childhood trauma
Yeah.
and, my relationships and all this stuff, like it can be a bit much. So I do definitely think we need to build some momentum forward in any way we can.
Yeah.
Like you said, to create that space to do the work.
Yeah. I think especially with addictions, if your main coping mechanism for dealing with a difficult emotion is the addiction, then jumping straight into therapy where it is you're gonna dig up a lot of these difficult emotions, a lot of uncomfortable experiences that it might cause you to then act out. So building in some momentum first with your recovery and getting some space from your habit. And then, like you said, learning the tools of resilience in order to sit with these uncomfortable experiences.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think that's it. That's the main thing that happens in early stage sobriety or kind of moving away from any habit is that, yeah, you do feel a bit healthier or you do feel a bit better. But the overwhelming feeling that I got was like, I've lost my safety blanket. Like I've lost the thing that I can click my fingers and it makes all the nasty stuff that I don't want to deal with go away. So it's like, great. Now I have to deal with it.
Yeah. You lose the painkiller. It's like if you've been had
Yeah.
access to a painkiller your
Yeah.
whole life and then suddenly you actually just have to feel the pain and just,
Mm.
just actually live and be sensitive, like a human being that's sensitive to the pains of the world. It's uncomfortable.
And it's interesting you're saying sensitive there. Like I found that a lot. I think in the first 6 months of sobriety, I cried more than I'd cried in the first 34 years of my life. And like just everything. Like I would see like a mother pushing like a toddler in a pram and I would just stop crying. Like I'd just be out and about. Like I was so sensitive to everything. Or like I would eat something delicious and it would like I'd have a tear in my eye. um, yeah, and I don't maybe this was like years of suppressed emotion that was just kind of coming to the surface. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't have as many tools in my arsenal then, so I was feeling everything
Yeah.
in that first
Well,
6 months.
just as you say, I mean, you said it earlier, like it's not even addiction. It's not even so much an escape. It's just a numbness. Like you just numb everything, both the pain and the joy. And then when you take
Mm,
away the numbing agent, it's like, yeah, you have to feel the pain, but it also allows you to feel the beauty and the joy because you're no longer numb to it.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think I wish more people knew that that is what actually happens in sobriety. You can lose 10 minutes of your life looking at a butterfly or, just finding these tiny little moments of joy that were always happening. Like they were always happening around you, but you were just oblivious to these little things. Um, and those are just the bits of life that are, they're the lovely bits, right?
Yeah. It's everything. It's what makes life worth living. The little joys and
Yeah.
the just being present also.
Mm, mm.
What does it mean to access your true potential?
So for me, I have this, again, this is another belief of mine that I have that anybody who has been given an addiction, and I say given as in like, this is me getting a little bit spiritual now, but I think addictions are something that are downloaded to our souls from source. And I think they are the ultimate test of character. I think the ones that were destined for greatness on earth were given an addiction as their first test. And I think if it's something that you can experience the depths of and bounce back from or work your way through, that then opens up access to this kind of limitless portal where you become a version of yourself that is no longer holding yourself back, knowing, which is often how it feels in the throes of an addiction. Like you have this consciousness that you're doing something is not furthering you in any way, shape, or form, but you just have this compulsion to keep holding yourself back. And I think a large part of that is because that individual is fucking scared of who they could really be. If they take the chains off, they rip it all off, and they actually go out there into the world being who they know they could be, that scares the shit out of them. So it's easier to play safe. It's easier to keep the chains on. It's easier to keep themselves anchored down. It's easier to stay in the comfort of numbing. It's easier to stay in the comfort of creating these limiting beliefs that like, oh, I'm not destined for stuff like that. I'm just, little old me. But then actually, once you start to do that work to move past an addiction, which another belief that I hold around addiction is that getting clean or getting sober will be the hardest thing you ever do. And it's that level of belief that then allows you to access this kind of fearless mode, I would say. Because if you've already done the hardest thing you're ever going to do in your life, like everything else is a piece of piss. Like, so what? Yeah, I'll move country. I'll start a business. I'll ask that girl out. Like, who cares? Like, I've already, like, it's not going to be harder than, and again, this is the resilience muscle that you're flexing. It's like, I've already done something harder than this. So this is going to be fine. Like, nothing that bad's going to happen. Like, it allows you to access that part of yourself that gives you this deep inner confidence. Obviously, you do still experience fear, but you just have an awareness of the fact that's just a physical reaction. Like, it's not a real thing. Maybe it's manifesting itself as a tightness in the chest or an increase of heart rate, but that's momentary. That's impermanent.
Like
that
it no
will
longer
pass,
controls
and
you.
no, exactly. Like you can move through it because you've got this body of evidence behind you of what you can do and what you can achieve. So then that unlocks, whether it's, fitness, finances, relationships, whatever it is, like you do have this deep sense when you're sitting down to your goal, to do your goal setting, that the only limitation on that goal is what you decide to write down.
Yeah.
There's no reason why you couldn't create, you write that goal down and be like, yeah, but what if it was one more than that? Like, well, yeah, obviously I could do that as well. Like, you can just keep pushing your limits or keep experimenting with where you find your uncomfortable edge. And the more that you have this continual practice of reaching the uncomfortable edge, the further that edge goes, the further that edge goes. Yeah, it's not saying that as, 1 week in sobriety, you think you can create a £100 million startup or something like that. But it's continually experimenting with self-exploration of what's possible.
It's interesting, this topic. You hear from a lot of people who have recovered from addiction saying that the addiction was one of the greatest gifts that they ever got because it gave them a glimpse, like it taught them lessons about freedom and peace. And it sounds like that's what you're saying. I'm just curious, for someone who's at the beginning of their journey, who
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel like it's a gift,
Mm-hmm.
what would you want to say to someone who is feeling kind of despair or hopelessness?
I think if someone who's right at that beginning, it's, hearing people like us who are a few years down the road, you're never going to feel like we do right now. And that's really encouraging them to come back into where they are currently, like really where they like that acceptance part of the art. Just the more that they can accept and really be like insanely proud of themselves for even considering making a change, like creating all of these much warmer and higher vibrational emotions in the body, like anything that is around guilt, shame, regret, like those emotions are going to vibrate so low. But if we can move up into the higher vibrating emotions of feeling proud, is the first thing that I usually will kind of encourage people to work on in that early stage, regardless of whether it's sobriety or anything. It's like building up a tiny little bit of momentum. Like, what would tomorrow look like for you to be standing in front of the mirror tomorrow evening, looking in the mirror and saying, "I'm quite proud of how I handled myself today." What does that day look like?
Mhm.
In the smallest little steps, like, and it might just be like, you know what, I just didn't drink. Great, all right, fine. Or it might just be like, I got out the house and I went into the shop to buy some bread and milk and I walked past the alcohol aisle. Awesome. We'll start there. Like actually having this tangible evaluation of what feeling proud of yourself looks like. And then taking really, really, really small steps and just also having this underlying understanding of how the compounding effect will work. Like if you continually have an intention to make yourself proud every day or become the person that you're quite proud of at the end of the day, and you do that day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out. Like me, I'm just over 1,000 days now. Like you think compound interest, it's these tiny little gains over a longer period of time. But in the beginning, it's just real focus on what can make you proud of yourself.
So I guess it's
And
like
that's
really
for everybody.
breaking it down into small, actionable steps. Like rather than looking at the top of the mountain and saying, there's no way I'm ever going to get to the top of Everest. Just saying, okay, what can I do from now to tomorrow morning? Like what would make me proud of
Yeah.
the next day?
Yeah. And I think that's where I went down. I had a coach at the time, and I think I really resonated with coaching as a modality because sobriety essentially it's a not doing thing, which is quite hard because it's all right, just don't do that. Okay. But I've still got 24 hours to feel like, what do I do? Like that was the real challenge for me. So I think anybody who is in that initial stage, like you need to find something to throw yourself into, whether that is the gym or whether that is cooking or learning the piano, like whatever it is. Like I think having hobbies, and even if you are obsessing over something, like I became fairly obsessive about fitness in the first few months of my journey. Um, tracking every macro, weighing out everything that I was eating. It wasn't just being in the gym. It was kind of planning every day what I was eating the next day because it was something that could use up a lot of my time and I had a focus around. So yeah, I probably had an unhealthy obsession with like health and fitness and diet, but it was in my head. I'm like, well, it's better to obsess over that than like obsess over
Yeah.
alcohol. And again, like having this underlying kind of knowledge, I was like, I won't be like this forever. This is just what I need to like
Yeah.
throw my energy and attention into for the
And
now.
temporary, I tell this to my clients all the time that it's okay to move in like the positive direction of addictions. Like if you can trade into just healthier addictions, like if you're trading your porn addiction for a Netflix addiction, that's moving in the right direction. It's like, it's okay to use these addictions as stepping stones as long as you're moving into healthier ones, because it's like peeling an onion. You start with the
Yeah.
big ones and then, you just keep working your way inward. As you know, as I know, it's like, it's a never ending process because addiction is just this very subtle way that we look for escape and we look for comfort. And it's like, we can start to look at these things with a finer and finer lens of, oh, look at the way I'm, reaching out to social media and looking for likes and for validation, and the way that I'm like compulsively doing that. It's a never ending journey of self-awareness. I'm curious to know if there's anything you think that you wish more people knew about recovery and sobriety.
I think I wish more people saw it as a positive. Like I don't know whether it's a stigma or whatever you want to call it, but like, I think being in it and having been out of it, like my old attitude around someone who was sober was like some down and out guy
Like,
who
it's
was sitting in
boring.
AA
Yeah.
meetings, who was just a loser, who like couldn't handle his drink because, it wasn't enough of a man to be able to handle his booze, or like, just some guy moaning about life in some church hall sitting in a circle at an AA meeting. And his life was just woefully pathetic. Um, which is why I kind of do what I do, because I think the most important part of the way that I operate in the world is to show people just how awesome sobriety can be. And not in like a preachy way that I want to shove that down people's throats, but it's just like, I wish people knew how amazing it feels to feel genuinely happy in a situation, not just happy and excited in a situation because I'm celebrating and I'm like a few drinks in, just the pure feeling of joy and the pure feeling of happiness. Obviously, to get those, you have to feel the pure feelings of your anger and your hate, sadness to kind of experience them. But I really wish just people knew how magical sobriety can be, because it brings you back to yourself. It brings you back to experiencing all of your emotions, purest, unadjusted, like unfiltered, natural state.
I think that's one of the things I've loved about following your social media is these posts that you make about kind of how you enjoy your life now compared to how you used to enjoy your life. Like on your
Mm,
birthday recently, where it was, you know, the old Allie would kind of be drunk at noon, and kind of the new Allie is like celebrating a sober party with friends and watermelon and that kind of stuff. It's a very positive and
yeah.
uplifting message that you're spreading.
Yeah. And I think there's certain things that I find myself doing, thinking that the old version of myself would have thought that this was shit.
Uh,
Yeah. But now I'm doing it. I'm like, no, no, what you were doing was shit. This is fucking awesome.
right. And it's a lot of
Yeah.
times it's like simple joys, like watching a butterfly
Yeah.
sunset or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas I think just for so long, I held these beliefs around, and maybe this is a cultural thing in the UK, that just any type of enjoying yourself had to involve alcohol, whether it was a birthday, a wedding, a funeral, like cremate, like all occasions were like bookended with alcohol. Even in the UK, like weather's not great. So it's like the sun's out. That means everybody gets drunk. Or like this weekend in the UK, we've had a bank holiday weekend. It means it's a 3-day weekend. Like for so many people, that means great. That's 2 days I can get drunk. Like I can get really drunk on, is that Friday and Saturday and Sunday, and then I've got Monday to like recover before I go back to work on Tuesday. And it's just, there's just so much that culturally that I just wonder how many people really want to do that, and how many people do it just because it's what they do, or like for lack of knowledge or inspiration or ideas of ways to break that cycle.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm curious for those of us who, are in the recovery world and kind of recognize that the joys of sobriety, whatever your substance is, it can be almost shocking to look at what we call normal culture and just see how sad it actually looks from the outside. A lot of the escapism or just um, and I'm just curious, why do you think it is this way? Like, why is it that this kind of behavior is so normative?
I think because of how downtrodden a lot of people have become through life, and how much of a readily available and easily accessible source of dopamine and escape that alcohol and drugs provide. Um, I mean, in in London specifically, if you've got the right numbers, you're never more than 15 minutes away from cocaine. Realistically, anywhere you are. Um, there's where I lived, my last apartment when I was here. There was a pub below me, like within, I'd say, 100 meters of where I lived, between pubs, bars, and shops. There was like over 30 different places that I could buy alcohol from, 5 of them 24 hours a day. So it's just, it's so available. It's so available, and it's so normalized as well. Like nobody thinks anything. Like yesterday, I was went into the shop just to buy some water, and the guy in front of me, he was buying a crate of cider. He bought a packet of Golden Virginia rolling tobacco, a packet of cigarettes, and a vape, and a small bottle of whiskey. And like nobody in the shop was batting an eyelid. Like, there was a woman in there with her daughter who'd come in to buy some sweets. And like, no part of her is like trying to shield that from her daughter or trying to make like it's just
It,
so
yeah.
normalized that this guy is buying loads of alcohol and nicotine
Yeah.
at his shop and he's going to go home. Like, and everyone's like, hey, or enjoy. Like, looks like you're having a fun weekend. Like, it's like people laugh and joke about it as if it's like accepted. Um, and I think that becomes, in that instance, that little girl who's in that shop who was like maybe 7 years old, like she's seeing that, she's exposed to that. So it's not necessarily, it's not her parents' fault.
Hmm.
It's just like, it's so, yeah, oh, daddy's gone to the pub after work. Like, she'll just grow up witnessing how large a part of society and how normal it is. Yeah, you work hard and then at the weekends or in
Yeah.
the evenings, you can go and have a drink to escape. Like it just,
And
people
it's
don't question it because they've been exposed to it from so young.
right. I think one of the things I'm just kind of thinking right now, it's so glorified and glamorized, and we're hidden often from the consequences. Like just with alcohol, there's so much marketing behind these alcohol companies that, hey, have a Heineken, enjoy your evening. This is beautiful commercial of like people partying and having fun. And we're hidden from the truth, which is sure there's that quote unquote fun night, but then there's the hangover afterwards, the troubles in relationships, the drunk driving, the poor
Yeah.
performance. And part of it's the marketing and the fact that there's
Mhm.
an industry behind it that's making money off of selling these products. I think that's got to play a role in it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think how much sway that they have as well. Like, I was saying here, like usually when the weather is good, like the supermarkets will move the alcohol front of the shops, like, like bank holiday weekend deals or Easter deals. Like it will always be those things pushed to the front because it is just so associated with, like you say, the glamorous side of enjoying yourself.
Mhm.
Like treat yourself, like you deserve it.
Yeah.
You've been working all week. Like now the sun's out, go outside and have, they're saying it like, and have a glass of prosecco or whatever it is. But I mean, they're not showing you what it looks like when the single mum is 2 bottles of wine deep on a Tuesday night, because she can't handle the stress of her life and her kids have finally gone to sleep. And she's got a minute to herself and she's drinking herself into a coma on the sofa.
Yeah.
Like, you're never going to see that on an advert.
Yeah. It's interesting, there's the other thing that's coming to me is like whenever you see a sci-fi movie or something that's kind of in the future, and in this sci-fi movie or future, you see the people taking some drug like soma or something, some like futuristic sci-fi drug, and you see them and it's easy to kind of like judge it then and be like, oh my God, this future where people are really medicating themselves with these drugs. And it's just, that's really what we're doing with a lot of these substances. And I have to be
Mm.
honest, like part of me, as we're speaking about this right now, part of me feels like a hypocrite because I also know it's like, yeah, I use sugar in the same way. Like I know I eat cookies as a way to kind of like, there's no nutritional benefit. They're not really bringing any happiness to my life. But I also know it's like, yeah, it's okay. It brings me some joy. It has some negative consequences as well. So I also understand that compulsive feeling of, wow, okay, it's helped. Like I just kind of feel good when I eat it. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
For sure. I think with everybody that I know that's in active recovery, of some sort, still maintains a vice or two. And I think when you have the comparison of like how damaging the effects are of that vice compared
the
to how
original one.
damaging
Yeah.
the effects of some of the original ones are, you tend to kind of give yourself a little break.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I think you and I think you and I are quite similar in this. It's almost like celebrating, like I
Yeah.
celebrate my cookie this because I'm like, yeah,
Oh,
I'm going to
100%.
down this cookie and
Yeah.
maybe two. Um, because
Yeah.
it's kind of a
Yeah.
celebration of how far we've come.
Yeah. It's almost kind of like if this is the worst thing that you're going to do today, like that's pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like if the worst thing that you're going to do today is sit by the beach and enjoy a cookie and just have that moment to yourself, like, we've come a long way.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of an ideal sunset, sit by the beach, watch the
Right.
sunset, have a
Yeah.
cookie, maybe have some loved ones around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. And it's a nice kind of a nice check-in to be like, okay, yeah, we've come pretty far.
Yeah. And of course, to acknowledge that if someone's main vice is food, then obviously it's a different story, right? If your main thing
Sure.
is binge eating, or any kind of eating disorder, then it's a different story. Maybe for you,
Yeah.
the thing is, having one beer while you watch the sunset kind of thing. Like
Yeah,
that's the moving
exactly.
up.
Yeah. Cause yeah, for sure. I know there are people out there that, if they were to open a packet of cookies, that's game over. They couldn't, they'd finish the whole lot.
Yeah.
Whereas, we are all different. And I say this, like a lot of people, especially with something like alcohol, um, it can be in part of that acceptance piece at the beginning is just accepting there are millions and millions and millions of people worldwide that can have a glass of wine with their dinner and then not drink for 2 weeks. There are so many people that can enjoy a bottle of beer and watch a sunset and then go and have water with their dinner afterwards. There are loads of people that, sometimes when you're in the addiction and you kind of become very like anti alcohol, and kind of, again, like, I don't really, in any of my content, like I don't get angry at alcohol companies or like I don't try and pay because I think that just hinders the acceptance piece. It's almost like we are in a society where alcohol companies have massive marketing budgets. You won't be able to live your life without avoiding an alcohol advert. Like supermarkets will push alcohol in the supermarkets. You could try and campaign against that, but it's almost like you will be fighting a bit of a losing battle, and that's just going to hinder you moving through it. So it is part of that accepting that like not everybody is like you. Not everybody who like drinks alcohol you can't be like, oh, they're all lying to themselves that they're not addicted. No, like Sally can genuinely have a glass of red wine with her Sunday lunch once a month. She doesn't have a problem. She's cool.
Yeah.
It didn't get her in the same way that it got you. Um, and I think that it helped because I'll be able to look at somebody who is maybe just having that one beer. Like I know plenty of people in Bali who do drink, but they don't drink a lot. And maybe you've met similar people on your travels that there's alcohol is around, but like I'm not generally in groups where people are overly abusing it. Like they will have a beer at sunset. That's fine. Or they may have like a glass of wine at dinner. And to get to a place where you can be happy for that person, not be like, oh, I wish I was the kind of person that could have a beer. It's like, I'm not. I'm like, I'm very happy with my coconut. And I'm very happy for you that you can have a beer and that we can enjoy this moment.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I'm ruining that moment by internalizing, "Oh, I wish I was doing what they're doing. Or like, why do they have to drink it? They're drinking in front of you because they don't have a problem with alcohol. That's your problem.
Mm,
Own it.
mm.
Um, be happy for them. Be happy for you. And we can all move on and look at the lovely sunset. And there's those little mindset shifts that's often just an internal dialogue that you're having with yourself
Yeah.
that nobody around you even knows is going on. And so it's trying to change those conversations that you have with yourself, make moving through life with addiction a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, that's a great place to wrap up. Last question for you. Where can people find out about you, or do you have anything special offers or things going on these days?
Yeah, so they can find me on Instagram, which is at Change with Ali. Um, and depending on when this is going out, I've got a couple of group programs at the moment. So I have one that is purely sobriety focused. I have another one that is more high performance focused, where we're looking at moving into different fitness and finance goals as well as sobriety. And then I have a shorter program, which is kind of self paced, which is the Art of Sobriety program, which brings in more tools and techniques and protocols to practice into sobriety. So that's more stuff like follow along meditations and breath works and things like that. So they can find out all about that on the Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely link that in the show notes. All right. That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unhooked. We will catch you all on the next episode.